Thanks everybody for coming this evening. We've got a great presentation, some great speakers for you. My name is Fraser Haney. I'm going to be your moderator tonight. I work locally here at the Mojave Desert Land Trust. And before we get started with the program, I'd just like to take a minute to recognize the Joshua Tree National Park Association and the Desert Institute, part of the Park Association, for organizing this, the Black Rock Lecture Series. And I also like to thank Copper Mountain College for co-sponsoring and hosting us tonight. The association is an invaluable partner to Joshua Tree National Park. They operate the educational bookstores at the park's 4 visitor centers, as well as staffing many of these locations with information specialists who provide visitor services alongside the National Park Service Rangers. In addition, the association operates the Desert Institute, which operates weekend field programs for adults and families. They offer courses in natural sciences and cultural history, creative arts, and desert survival, along with organizing and operating the Black Rock Lecture Series, which we're here at tonight. And if you want to know more about the Park Association or the Black Rock Lecture Series, you can go see Meg over at the association table. I'd also like to recognize in particular some of the members of the association's board of directors that are with us here tonight, so please stand up as I call your name to be recognized. Mark Wheeler. Hello, Mark. Thank you. Bill Truesdell. Bill. I don't see, there you are, Bill. Hi. Lorraine Turk. Where are you, Lorraine? Costa Rica. She's in Costa Rica. I can't see every face out there, you know. Karen Tracy. Hi, Karen. And Kurt Sauer. And Paul Smith. This just in, we're Paul Smith. We appreciate the excellent facility that Copper Mountain College has provided us here with. Thanks very much for being excellent hosts. And I just want to stop and recognize partners along the side here. The Joshua Basin Water District has a table up. The Bighorn Desert View Water Agency has a table up. Transition Joshua Tree in the back of the room. And the Morongo Basin Conservation Association. So just to give you a quick idea about our structure this evening, I'm going to shortly introduce one of the 3 speakers at a time who will give a slideshow and a talk. And this will be followed by a question and answer session. And the way that questions are going to be taken is you can either grab one of these sign-up slips over on this table, or to make it easy for you, volunteers are going to come out to the audience and hand out sign-up slips to you if you raise your hand once all the questions, or once all the speakers have spoken. I'm going to gather these question slips up, and I'll be asking the questions on your behalf to the speakers. I apologize in advance if we don't get to all the questions. There's just too many of them sometimes. But I will keep any questions that don't get asked publicly and hand them off to the speakers, and feel free to come up to talk to the speakers after the presentation is finished as well, to ask any of those questions that are left hanging. So just to say a word before we get going with Bill, water in our region in the desert's obviously very interesting and very hotly contested. I think every community in the Morongo Basin has its own unique water issue, and between states becoming, the state regulations becoming more stringent on certain minerals, and then the instability that climate change introduces, there's a lot to get through and a lot to talk about tonight. So we're going to kind of start on the large scale. I'd hate to say a state scale, it's really almost a global scale, with Mr. Bill Patzert. Bill is often called the prophet of California climate. He's a scientist at California Institute of Technology's NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, in Pasadena, California. His research is focused on the application of NASA satellite data to improving our understanding of our planet's climate and important environmental problems, ranging from the developing El Nino, La Nina and longer-term climate forecasts, to monitoring the health of our coral reefs. The author of many scientific and popular articles, Bill works with undergraduate and graduate students from all over the world and lectures at many local universities. A media favorite, he's often sought out by reporters and is regularly seen on local and national television representing NASA and JPL. In a recent article, he was named one of the West's most influential individuals in dealing with water issues. He's a graduate of Purdue University and went on to earn a PhD in oceanography at the University of Hawaii. Bill began his career on a research faculty of the University of California's Scripps Institution of Oceanography in La Jolla, California, and then moved to JPL, where he's been employed since 1983. During his career, he has served as a consultant to many respected organizations, including NASA, the U.S. Department of Commerce, the United Nations, and many scientific and environmental groups. He's received many awards for scientific accomplishments, as well as communicating science to the public, including 4 NASA Exceptional Service Medals and the Medal of the Centre National d'Etudes Spéciales. Did I say that right, Bill?
Good enough.
Good enough. That's the highest award of the French Space Agency. So please welcome Mr. Bill Patzert.
That was a pretty inflated introduction, huh? Well, it's a pleasure to be up here in the high desert. I live in Sierra Madre, which is the foothills of the San Gabriels, and we have water problems too. So tonight, though, what I'd like to talk a little bit about, the larger picture, to put this drought in perspective, and ask the question, is there such a thing as drought in the desert? All right? Sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. Okay, let's start here with a little bit of climate for your local area here. This is the Joshua Tree climate, and you can see that you get about 4.7 inches of rain per year, if you're lucky. Usually comes in the winter, but sometimes you get lucky and you get a nice little monsoon flow. So actually in August, September, and October, you can often get rain. And you can see here, of course, temperatures range in the summertime exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit to this time of the year where it gets up to about 60 degrees. All right, so that's a pretty interesting climatology. It's one of the lowest rainfalls in the state of California. You know, Death Valley has about 2 inches of rain. All right, Los Angeles has about 15 inches of rain. Redwood City has about 100 inches of rain. All right, so that's where you sit. Whoops. Okay, now, what are droughts? Those are prolonged periods of below normal rainfall. And right now, we're going into our 4th year of drought. This is we've had 3 of the driest years in California history. Going back to early records, which go back to the 1870s, our present drought, the last 3 years were the driest 3 consecutive years in recorded history in California. But a drought is not necessarily just 3 years. Generally, droughts in California and the American West can last for decades. They usually last for decades. For instance, you can see that we had a prolonged drought from the mid-1940s, some of you will remember, to the late 1970s, all right? And the average rainfall, using Los Angeles to give you an example, that was a very long drought, but it was only about 15% below normal, all right? And then one of the more serious droughts we had was 1987 to 1991. And you can see that was at about 63% of normal. And our present drought, which really started at about the year 2000. So 11 of the last 16 years have been dry in California. And that drought is really, it's only about 15% below normal. So drought doesn't mean no rain, all right? It just means a small increment. And of course, we had a very wet decade from 78 until 98 That was the big El Nino year. And that was only about 15% above normal. So 3 dry years are not a drought. All right? A drought is only a small change, about 15% above or below normal. That's wet years, dry years, compared to average, all right? And it's usually over a few decades. Now, of course, we've had histories here in California where we've had what we call mega droughts, where we've had over 100 years of below average precipitation in the American West. Now, we certainly hope we're not going to get into that. So, droughts are long, but they tend to be modest. The other thing is, this is the U.S. Drought Monitor. It tells you which parts of the United States are experiencing drought and how severe it is. The other thing is you can see that most of the American West, especially California, all right, but into Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, all the way into Washington, we've been in a prolonged drought here for more than a decade. So droughts are long and droughts are large. But droughts are also regional. So this is the largest reservoir in the state of California. This is Lake Oroville in Northern California. And essentially, it's where we save all our water, and then we send it down the Sacramento, and we pull it out of the Bay Delta, all right? And it comes down the San Joaquin Valley in the California Aqueduct. You've all seen that when you drive up the 5. And it provides 40% of the water for Southern California. So there's 20 million people in Southern California, and that aqueduct provides 40% of our water. All right? But you can see when things get dry in Northern California, it definitely impacts us in Southern California. By the way, Lake Oroville has never been this dry. And this would give you an example. Here's all the great reservoirs: Lake Shasta, Oroville, Folsom. All right, you guys don't worry about the Diamond Valley Lake, which is in Hemet, and that's where the water is pumped out of the Colorado River over the Tehachapi's into Hemet. But you can see what has happened over the last 3 years. Pretty dramatic. All right? But just to cut it short here, when it comes to water, there's a couple of 800-pound gorillas, all right, that don't have much to do with rainfall, all right, or don't have much to do with droughts. And what are they, all right? The biggest gorilla in the state of California is agriculture, all right? Why is that, all right? Is California's 800-pound gorilla is that agriculture uses 80% of the available water in the state of California. And let me say this, there's a lot of water in California, all right? There might not be a lot of water in this community, but there's a lot of water in the state of California that everybody in the state supposedly could share. So agriculture uses 80% of the available water, but now this is an interesting thing. Agriculture is only 2% of the state's economy. Let me say that again. They use 80% of the available water. So in the last 50 years, the fundamental economic structure of the state of California has changed, all right? It's much more diverse, all right, than it used to be, all right? So cities, industries, and communities like this only get 15% of the available water. And when the water gets tight, who do they cut off? The people, right, exactly, all right? Now, talking about the Coachella Valley, here's another 800-pound gorilla, all right? This is the Coachella Valley, what I call golf course, all right, debacle. Now, there's 123 golf courses in the Coachella Valley, all right? Now, there's no lawns around here. I noticed that driving in, all right? Now, which way am I going? All right. All right. So there's 123 golf courses in the Coachella Valley, all right? And right here. And they use 37 billion gallons of water a year, all right? So that's enough, for instance, to service the average about 225,000 families in Southern California. That's a lot of water, all right? Now, here's the other thing. In Los Angeles, to water a golf course takes about 100 million gallons a year, all right? If you go to the Inland Empire, San Bernardino, it takes about 50% more. But if you go to the Coachella Valley, it actually takes 300 million gallons of water a year to water those golf courses at Rancho Mirage, all right? And the other thing that's really interesting about that, it doesn't cost hardly anything, because where are they getting that water from? They're getting it from the deep aquifer, which is essentially, for this region, it's your water future, all right? Those deep aquifers are your reserve for the next 50 to 100 years. And what they're being used for is watering golf courses. All right, now let's talk a little bit about California climate. Now, California is definitely warming. You're living in a warming world. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has not been this high for the last 5 million years. All right, the world is warmer. It's 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it was 100 years ago. All right, and so one thing I can tell you for sure is that a Joshua tree over the next 50 to 100 years, it's going to be warmer. So the average temperature in the summertime is not going to be 100 degrees, it's going to be 110 degrees, all right? And that's going to have a big influence on the ecosystems and the quality of life, for instance, in this particular region. For instance, even now, with the present warming that we've seen, you can see that the Joshua trees are tending to migrate to higher altitudes, all right? So, and that is essentially a reaction to warmer temperatures, all right? So that one I can guarantee you. Now here's some good news. Some people say that in a warming world, it's also going to be a drying world. In other words, you're going to have even less than your 4.7 inches of rain. Well, that's not necessarily true, because my colleagues and I have actually looked at this, and it turns out that there is no long-term trend in precipitation in California. True that there are droughts that last for many decades, all right? But the good news is that there is, at this point, no long-term trend in precipitation. So that's good, all right? Now, I always say that there are some things that you can control in life, and there's some things that you cannot control in life, all right? But one thing we could say about California, like Yogi Berra says, the future definitely ain't what it used to be. Now, one thing that you can control are wet decades and dry decades, because they've been happening for thousands of years. They're part of natural cycles, all right? The other thing that you can't control, as you get larger, even out here in the high desert, you're going to be warmer. So get ready for a warmer world, and you're going to have to adapt to that. All right, that means more electricity, more air conditioning. Your local ecosystems will be changing. And the other thing that we noticed is that we see shorter snowpack seasons. So often the snowpack in the Sierras or in the local mountains here are a water reservoir for you. The snow that you get in the winter, all right, you use in the summer and the fall. It drains back into the ecosystem. But the snowpack season, because it's warmer, is shorter now. Snow starts later, disappears earlier. All right, and so that's going to have a big impact. But of course, the biggest impacts are us. All right? Water demand is increasing, and there's no way to stop it. All right? Why is it increasing? There's just more of us. Since 1950, the population of Southern California has quadrupled. Quadrupled, all right? It's gone from 5 million to 20 million, all right? And it continues to increase. This is the greatest place on earth to be poor, Southern California. So they keep coming, all right? Not only that, we're more affluent than we used to be. So we use more stuff as well as more water, all right? And of course, the economy continues to grow and change. For instance, Silicon Valley didn't exist 50 years ago. And by the way, they're a big consumer of water, in the same way that many of the solar plants that you see out here in the desert are a big consumer of all right? So the biggest stress on water is us, all right? All right, now what can we control, all right? Is that you import water. In Los Angeles, we import water. In Southern California, we import 70% of our water. So there's 20 million people that import 70% of their water from Colorado, the Owens Valley, all right, the Bay Delta, all right? And so we have to use that imported water wisely, like some of the demonstrations here today, all right? We have to use less water. We have to use water in a more clever way, all right? All right, the other thing we have to do is that when we store water, mostly in the ground, we have to make sure that those water storage basins are clean. About half of the water storage basins in Southern California are polluted. And I think there are some in this region, all right? So it's a high priority to keep your water storage basins clean, all right? And of course, the reason we have to do that is that we will get wet decades like the 80s and the 90s, but they will be followed by dry decades like we've seen for the last 16 years. So we have to learn how to store water. We can't use it all today and tomorrow. And of course, on an individual level, I'm a product of the 60s, you know, I always say reduce, reuse, recycle. And that means use less water, all right? That means going to innovative things like toilet to tap. We have to start reusing that water, all right? By the way, that's a great idea, all right? And use gray water. Not all water is drinking water, all right? So there are many clever things that people all over the world are doing. The Australians, the Israelis. All right. The Israelis are down to 50 gallons per day per person. That's pretty good. I think you're about, what, 90 or 100 up here? Which is also, that's amazing. That's really good. Everybody gets credit. And then here's the other one, is that we do have big aquifers in the San Joaquin Valley. We have them in the high desert, in the Coachella Valley. And these reservoirs, these deep aquifers, they're left over from the Pleistocene. So some of that water is 10,000 to 100,000 years old. But we're drilling it like we were drunken sailors, all right? And one of these days, in the Coachella Valley where they have all those golf courses, somebody's going to turn on the pump and you're going to hear a great sucking sound, all right? And so you're going to see 123 golf courses with no grass, all right? So we have to be a little more respectful. By the way, this is an international problem. Old aquifers and draining them. The Agualala, you know, the San Joaquin Valley is an excellent example, all right? And of course, the biggest thing here is that water law in the state of California is based on laws that were written in the late 19th, early 20th century. And so it's the Wild West. Water is governed on a local level, all right? That's why the farmers are getting 80% of the water, and you're only getting 10%, all right? And so I think, and this is a suggestion I often make, is that we have to repeal and rewrite California's water laws. And it's one of the few places in the world where water is governed on a local level, by the way. The Australians do it on a national level, and so do most other dry countries, all right? So, what's the story here? The story here is adaptation to a more crowded world, a warmer world, all right? And so what we have to do is, you know, come to a realization that we need much better water management, all right? And how do you get that? You need water leadership, all right? So it's just like everything else. This is America. This is a democracy. What you do is you pass laws here and then you enforce them, all right? So the most important thing you will ever do is vote, all right? So how you vote is way more important than low-flow toilets, you know, losing your lawn or showering together, all right? And so that's my final message, because in the end, all right, you don't really make decisions about your water. Politicians do. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patzert. Our next speaker is Mr. Kirby Brill. Kirby Brill has served as the general manager at the Mojave Water Agency since October of 2000. Mr. Brill has worked in the public and private sectors during 20 years of experience in water resources management. Prior to his employment at the Mojave Water Agency, Mr. Brill was the executive director at the San Gabriel Basin Water Quality Authority and has worked for the Orange County Water District. Mr. Brill received his Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering with a minor in geology, and he also holds a Master's of Business Administration. He's currently a licensed professional engineer with the state of California. Please welcome Kirby Brill up to the podium.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Always a pleasure to come out to your community. Matter of fact, I was telling the story at dinner. I was driving out, watching the sunset, and kind of competing with Friday night traffic a little bit, and then was recalling the days back in the early '80s when I used to come out here as a young man and visit the. Actually, it wasn't the park then; it was the monument, and do a little climbing. So it's always great to come back to the community. Lots has changed, and that's kind of the theme of the talk. And actually, I'm going to pick up on a lot of the points that were just made as well. We are living in a changing world, and as was just alluded to, that world is changing us, as we experience it. And the big question that we have in front of us is what do we do about it? A little saying we use around our office a lot is our past defines us. The present shapes us, and the future directs us. So I think the theme here, obviously, is to understand what's happening around us and apply that as we look into the future. I'm going to really have kind of two parts of my presentation. The first part is I'm going to recap three distinct happenings in 2014, and it was a very interesting year. I was listening to my bio there. I think it needs to be updated a little bit. I'm actually now have about 30 years of experience. And over those 30 years of experience, I don't think I've ever witnessed a year like 2014. It was an incredibly unique year with a number of different things happening during last year. But I'm going to focus on three of those, and I want to try to make the connection on how those three events are shaping us, and then offer my own version of kind of what some of those trends are in the future, and what some of those future outlooks might be for us. The first thing is referred to as the Bay Delta Conservation Program. How many of you in the audience have heard about this and kind of, okay, right, yeah, about 25% or so. This is taken right from the Bay Delta Conservation Program, and as was just talked about, Lake Oroville is the initial reservoir in the State Water Project, is where most all of the water that received from the State Water Project is stored initially, and then it flows through the delta and all through the delta levees, and there's a number of issues associated with that. There's water quality issues, there's levee issues, there's a prediction that as we move into the future, we'll see some sea level rises, and basically the predictions are it'll basically render that delivery mechanism obsolete in the next many decades. And so what's being contemplated right now is a huge project, one that's received top priority from this governor, Governor Brown, and it has many different parts to it. You've probably heard most about the conveyance part, and that's a relatively aggressive tunnel, if you will, going from the north of the delta, underneath the delta, to the south of the delta, where there's a current pump station that already exists that currently takes that water out of the delta and delivers it into the State Water Project to serve those 20, 25 million Californians, both actually in Northern California and Southern California, and also many ag interests. What's not talked about a lot is there's also a restoration component. This is a big project, one of the biggest projects I think the state may have ever undertaken short of the State Water Project. And it's, as you can imagine, it's highly controversial. One of the things that we're very interested in, Mojave Water Agency and this community that you're going to hear about in just a moment should be interested in, is that part of our additional supplies that we have available to us to augment our natural groundwater supplies are coming from the State Water Project. The Mojave Water Agency now has partnerships with Bighorn Desert View Water Agency High Desert Water Agency and Joshua Basin Water District to bring water in and have that supplement the available natural supplies that are underneath us in the groundwater basin. So you can see the red line there is kind of a decreasing availability, long-term average availability that we as a state water contractor and other contractors have been witnessing as a result of a lot of the different pressures on the delta. So I won't go into a lot of the detail, but this is one project. It's been evolving ever since I started my career back in the mid-'80s. But it's now coming to a nexus where decisions will be made probably in 2015. There was a huge environmental report that was produced at the end of 2014. It's currently under review, so there has been a lot of discussion. There will be a lot of additional discussions and decision going into 2015. As I mentioned, highly controversial. Typically, this has been a north-south issue. How many of you voted or remember the peripheral canal vote back in the 80s? Yeah. Okay, this is a version of the peripheral canal. A lot of time has passed and a lot of issues have now changed, but the concepts are similar. And there's communities that have actually very much adamantly opposed this. It's very contentious. Let me go back here. Yeah, there's other communities that have been weighing in. This is actually an editorial by the Twin Tunnels would benefit Northern Californians. There's not a lot of mention that communities like Silicon Valley, like Santa Clara, those communities are also dependent upon the State Water Project. So there's significant benefits not just to the south, not just to agriculture, but also Northern California communities as well. And the second point I want to talk about, we touched on just a few moments ago, is the drought. This was very real. Our Southern California in general didn't get hit as hard as some of the other communities in Central California and Northern California, but it was very real, and there were very real impacts. One of those impacts was the first ever 0% allocation where we started with the State Water Project. Eventually that was moved up into the 10% allocation, and that just basically means we get 10% of the maximum amount of water that we could possibly get out of the State Water Project. So a 0% allocation was indicative of very, very critical conditions, and it kind of kicked off a very interesting dialogue that occurred all the way up, north and south, all the way through the state. And we had some very real communities that literally ran out of water. These issues were real. There were water trucks that had to be brought into these communities. And fortunately, we were off to a pretty good start, but our reservoirs are extremely low. And we're still facing potentially another very severe 2015 condition. This actually was in the LA Times. There was a mention about adapting and changing our habits. This community is very well aware of how precious water is and how we have to use it very efficiently. The rest of the Mojave Water Agency has been entering into conservation programs over the last decade. We started a very aggressive turf removal about 5 years ago, but for the most part, that didn't catch on in the rest of the state. That is very much different today. This was in Monday's California section of the LA Times, and I thought there was an interesting quote that I pulled out of that article. When people look back at this issue 5 years from now, this last 6 months will be the beginning of the end of our love affair with turf. Times are changing and attitudes are changing. We went through a drought in the kind of mid to late 70s. There was an awareness, and I think for the most part, a lot of us kind of fell back into a sense of security. I just have a feeling that that's different this time. There is a much greater awareness of water and the precious nature of that water that's now occurring all throughout California. And I really think that's creating some lasting cultural changes that we're going to continue to see in the future. Groundwater laws. We talked about the need for changing groundwater laws. Some of the major laws that were put in place were actually enacted in 1914, and last year was a monumental year. And there were groundwater laws that were passed. They were referred to as landmark groundwater legislation, sweeping new California groundwater pumping rules signed into law by Governor Brown. This is an interesting quote that I pulled out of this article. I thought this was the lead-off sentence. California will no longer be the only Western state with the pump-as-you-please approach to groundwater. After Jerry Brown signed legislation Tuesday requiring local agencies with depleted supplies to begin managing their wells. This set a pretty high bar for a lot of communities. We may be impacted in some of our areas. Most of these laws were targeted, not exclusively, but primarily to the Central Valley, where there are huge problems, where groundwater basins have been used unsustainably for many years. But this is a new paradigm shift in California water management, and it's one that we should all recognize is happening, and again, recognize that this is part of the changing landscape that's really changing and shaping us. Okay, what does all this mean? I'm going to take a stab at taking some of these three trend lines and some of these others and making some prognostications, if you will, going forward, and I've got kind of four areas I'd like to focus on. One is 0% allocation for us as a contractor and for other contractors in the state. I believe will become more normal. As was just discussed, we're going to see the higher highs and lower lows is the catchphrase out there in the water industry. With the depleted snowpack that we're seeing because of climate change, our seasons are going to be shorter, which means they're going to be flashier. We're not going to have the storage of snowpack. So how do we kind of manage in that? And what that'll mean for us is the year like we had last year, I think we're going to have that a lot more. That means that the value of groundwater storage becomes more important. And I would offer that the value of distributed groundwater storage becomes even more important. It's very nice to have big dams, big giant groundwater basins, but the ability to leverage our individual assets more collectively. There's groundwater basins in High Desert, in the Joshua Basin, over in the Landers and the Bighorn area. We're beginning to better utilize those assets. And those types of assets are going to become more and more important in the future. I would offer an efficient yet moderated market will connect buyers and sellers. There's the ability for these distributed groundwater basins to be interconnected and collaboration resulting in these types of relationships that can produce win-win opportunities to take those groundwater basins, take the water that's available and move it around when it's needed, where it's needed. And also expanded use of available existing storage, both local and statewide, will help facilitate these dry year transfers. We had an opportunity in 2014, I think, to begin to test some of these systems. Many of these tests were brand new, both locally and statewide. In my opinion, we need to become better at these kinds of systems and more fully utilize and leverage these assets. The second is a trend will continue towards using water more efficiently. This seems like a no-brainer, but it has really caught on in the state of California. Another requirement that came out of the drought was the State Water Resources Control Board to require all relative medium and large water purveyors to report their efficiencies to the state. They report in the terms of gallons per capita per day. Water used per person for each of the water districts. Those now report up to the state. Those are now being looked at, and those are being published in the papers, and it's a new metric that we're all kind of getting used to. There'll be more wastewater reclamation, and like what we just mentioned is a continued cultural change toward the acceptance of a new version of appealing landscape. Again, some of these concepts are not that new for this community, but they're catching on, and I think they're here to stay for the rest of California. There's going to be continued pressure to, quote, reduce reliance on the Delta, to reduce some of these environmental pressures, especially during dry periods or wet periods. So again, it means we need to grab the water when it's available, use it as best as possible, and have the means to move it around if necessary or utilize it when it's not there. There's going to be pressures to stretch water supplies. I've used an acronym here. I try not to use too many acronyms, but the UWMP, or Urban Water Management Plans. These are plans that all large water providers, we have to develop one every 5 years. And what's in those plans are 25-year projections of how do we match supply with demand. Those are going to become more and more and more important as we move forward. And I would offer that the likelihood of those being challenged in courts will become greater. As far as conservation, I believe we're going to be pushing the boundaries of what we can do. Even in communities like this, I think, where we all feel like we're very efficient. We just referenced, I think, in Israel and also Australia, where they have gallon per capita per days down into the 50s, which is kind of almost unheard of, almost incredible, and we think, gosh, how could they possibly do that? Again, when we look out another decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, I believe those boundaries are going to be pushed. The third is the worlds of water planners and land use planners will continue to collide. There's some relatively new laws that the state passed in the mid-2000s that basically required these worlds to collide. That migration is still occurring and will continue to occur in the future. These new groundwater laws, there's pieces of the new groundwater laws that facilitate that conversion of these two worlds. And that's going to continue in the future. Matter of fact, it would not surprise me at all if there are additional state laws that are passed in the coming decade that make these relatively stringent requirements that we now work on even more stringent. And again, require the land use approval communities, be it either a city or county, to work more closely with water communities to make sure that what kind of growth that we are seeing is smart and it takes into account the available water resources. The plus side of that we're already seeing is there's new relationships that are forming. The dialogue is occurring, it is beginning to occur, and there's a greater level of communication. I work very closely with a group within the San Bernardino County that's trying to facilitate some of these discussions, again, both at the city level and the county level. We've got a long way to go, but the dialogue is really beginning, and I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing. Fourth, again, not kind of a no-brainer, and again, something this community is very good at, and that's recognizing a greater need to collaborate, leverage, and share our resources. We're all learning to do more with less. Coming off the Great Recession was a somewhat painful, but in my mind, a very valuable learning experience for us all. All the cities, all the governments really got slammed financially, and it kind of put us on our heels for a little bit, and because of that, we're all recognizing that our assets available to us are limited, and there's a greater need to reach out to our neighbor to say, okay, what are my assets, what are my liabilities, what are your assets, what are your liabilities, how can we form a more effective, more efficient partnership in leveraging our mutual assets and liabilities. Seeking regional efficiencies may also become the new norm. Again, something this community is very familiar with. Mojave Water Agency has tried very hard to work in partnership with the local water agencies. You're going to hear in just a moment from Marina West, where 4 agencies got together with some historical bad blood, if you will, between one or more or all of those agencies. And we've really learned to say, okay, what is our common goals? What are our available assets, and how can we work together? And I think the story that Marina is going to tell is really an encouraging one, and gives me great hope that there's much more available to us in the future. In addition, the way the funding is becoming available, the state just passed Prop 1, which is another water bond that makes funds available for groundwater storage, water reclamation, water use efficiency, a lot of water things. But there's kind of one common denominator that's embedded within that proposition, and that's you got to have your act together regionally. You know, it's not going to be the one city, the one water district that screams the loudest that gets the funds. It's really going to be those communities that work together to demonstrate projects that serve regional benefits, that maximize regional resources. Those are the folks that are going to do well. We've already seen that in the past. that paradigm has been shifting, but I think we're going to see a continual shift with Prop 1. And again, this community and also all other communities with the Mojave Water Agency have become pretty good at this. But I would offer that we have to be even better than we have been, especially to compete with others across the state for these limited funds. And so the more we can have our act together, the more that we can look for these regional partnerships, the better we're going to be prepared to help finance some of the solutions that are going to be necessary. They're going to move us into this new world. So kind of my closer here is the drought is testing our systems. In kind of a warped way, this has been really good because it's reminded us, it's taught us what's going to happen, it's given us a glimpse of what the future is going to look like, and it's kind of forced us all to think a lot differently than we have, both locally, both regionally, and statewide. So I think my last slide is questions, but I understand we're going to hold that off to the end. So again, thank you very much, and I very much look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Kirby. And going a little more locally and getting a little more focused, we have Marina West, who's the general manager of the Bighorn Desert View Water Agency, not district, agency. Marina's public sector career spanned over 20 years, beginning as an intern out of college. For many years, she worked in water systems operations and maintenance. She's a professional geologist, and she's certified in water distribution, water treatment, and most recently completed a master's degree in public administration.
Good evening, everybody. I wanted to start with this slide because I think this is yesteryears mentality. For those who do not know Mary Austin, she did all her writing in the Owens Valley long before LADWP got there. But now we're sort of in this realm. And what I came to talk about is how Bighorn Desert View Water Agency and the other municipal producers in our groundwater basin are coordinating and controlling their own destiny rather than fighting for a perceived right. And this is the more modern thought amongst our groups. So our chronology is long. We started with a complaint, as most do. We had a long period of data gathering and maybe even eyes closed looking another way. We weren't really doing a lot of analysis of that data. We were just data gathering. And then there was a realization that the old ways were not working. And we began to forge a new plan and implement mechanisms to augment our native supplies. Unlike Joshua Basin Water District and High Desert Water District, who are located along the front of the Little San Bernardino Mountains and Joshua Tree National Park, Bighorn Desert View's service area is located along the eastern front of the San Bernardino Mountains, and so we actually do receive a measurable amount of natural recharge. These entities receive nearly no natural recharge. So for a little perspective, this represents High Desert Water District, Bighorn Desert View Water Agency, County Service Area Landers, and County Service Area Pioneer Town. And the Highway 247 runs right up through here, for those who are familiar with the area. And these represent groundwater subbasins, the pipes, and the Retchie. And we drew a new boundary that was more contiguous with the geology of the basins, and we decided that we would self-impose groundwater management. What does that mean? Well, we went to court on our own instead of being drugged there. And mainly to file in court to keep everybody honest and update an existing judgment, but the opposite is to go to court and let someone else decide your fate. So then we augmented our own native supplies by bringing in a pipeline to serve a recharge facility. And down in the lower corner here, this is a turnout structure from the State Water Project located in the Landers area. We ran a pipeline westward into the pipes wash. And this Morongo Basin pipeline that many of you know about is really here because of the foresight of previous leadership. And amongst us tonight, there are several, but for Desert View County Water would be President Ruth Riemann, who had the foresight to know that we would need an additional supply. And I think without these leaders from a few generations past, or 20 years ago now, that, not generations, but a few decades, we would really be in quite a different place. So while Bighorn Desert View Water Agency has never taken water off the pipeline until 2014, the stage was set, and without that, we would not have been successful. So we bring in new supply, we augment the native groundwater with state water project, but one is not going to replace the other. They both must be managed in a sustainable manner, and this becomes our next challenge. We also built this facility, and so the pipeline runs into the wash, and we created a project that would have a minimal environmental impact. Because we are not recharging every single day of the year, and it was not necessary to dig basins and disrupt the environment. And we think that through time we'll be able to operate with experience, we'll be able to operate in a more efficient manner here at the site. We have 5 acres in which we could recharge about 1,500 acre-feet if we needed to. So here are the management concepts for the new basin agreement. The key factors here are production caps for all of the entities which did not exist prior to the new judgment. And also what Kirby alluded to is some transfer capabilities. So when one has a need, another might be able to supply. And this is the regional cooperation that we've created, and the strategy works that we have accounts for water every year. We have a pumping cap. We can carry over water that's not pumped. We can trade stored balances between one another. Mojave is also a partner here that would store water for later sale to its retail agencies. And there's a cumulative storage in the basin, and we can bring purchases in. We can then deliver purchases out either to our customers or to another entity. And so we're pretty proud of this flexibility that we've created. So our next step is to long-term adaptive management. And what I brought this slide for is to show you that trends like this, not so good. Trends like this, not as bad. Trends like this, better. And so we're going to have to next determine what our flexibility can be, because we also know that droughts affect basin levels, but recoveries are possible. And so in this graph you can see in our basin that sometimes we actually almost recover. And so here we actually have a long-term trend that's somewhat increasing. But we have a lot of dynamics going on in the basin, a lot of wells that exist there, and different needs of the different entities. And so the adaptive management is what we'll have to do as we go through time. And so there's no set, this is where the end is, and this is where there's no more pumping. It's going to have to be a balance of bringing water in and using our natural supplies. When rainfall is more plentiful, we'll see some recharge, and when rainfall is not plentiful, then we'll see drops. And it's a matter of what we can tolerate. And so with that, I brought a very short presentation, and I'm already done. I want to thank the partners in this. The partners are High Desert Water District, the County Special Districts Department, and also Mojave Water Agency. And I think with that, it'd be great to get to your questions.
Thank you very much to our speakers. And we're going to have volunteers here. If you would like to write a question down for us to ask one of our speakers, you have a couple options. Raise your hand to get a slip, and they'll bring it around to you. If you want to ask a question to a specific speaker, please write that on the slip, and I'll make sure that it gets to that particular person. Yeah, otherwise, you're letting me choose or the speakers choose. I'm going to get the lights turned on here and let a few questions circulate. There you go. Okay, so as we're gathering questions, I've got one seed question just to start us off with. And any of the three of you that would like to take a crack at this, please go ahead and grab onto it. So the question that I've got is, the deficit between supply and demand will most likely be filled by groundwater, which is a strategic reserve of unknown quantity that's rapidly being depleted by overuse. Our question to the panel is, how do we allocate water that's available among the multiple competing needs like agriculture, population centers, golf courses in the Coachella Valley in a way that's sustainable? Anybody want to grab onto that?
Yeah, I'll take that. Let me come up there since
Sure.
I have feedback. I'm not quite sure, is that directed here locally, or was that a statewide or both?
That seems like a pretty statewide question.
Yeah, okay. Well, some of the water gets allocated, or has been allocated, actually by contract. So a lot of the water that comes through Oroville and goes into the state water project system, like I said, was allocated previously and currently is allocated by contract. Very difficult. I've learned a long time ago, never say never, but extremely difficult to grab a share of someone else's contract and take it. Them there are fighting words. So very difficult to do that. However, the opportunities lie, I think, in these kinds of mutual win-win-win-win partnerships that we've already been testing and really got put into play, in 2014. As far as the groundwater basins, I think that was the first part of the question. That is going to be an incredibly difficult challenge. I think there was a part in that question kind of referencing or stipulating to the only means of augmenting our supply is groundwater. That is not necessarily true. There are a number of means available. Conservation is definitely one of those. Reclamation is another piece. So there are lots of pieces of the portfolio. In water management, that's a common term we use, is managing a portfolio. And there are a number of, probably need more than two hands to count all the different pieces, potentially pieces of the portfolio. So it's not just limited to tapping more and more into groundwater basins. Although in the past, that has been an easy place to go to. But with these new groundwater laws, that will become increasingly difficult just to move more and more onto an already unsustainable groundwater basin. I kind of get there?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you very much. Okay, our first question, I'm going to go right down the stack and not sort them, just so that you know I'm being fair. Our first question has two parts, and it's to anybody on the panel. Number one is, what is the local per capita daily use per person in our area?
Well, I know for Bighorn Desert View, it's around 92 gallons per capita, and I know that, I'm pretty sure that for the other local water agencies, it's not much higher than that, maybe up to 110.
Did everybody hear that? It's 92 or around that for Bighorn Desert View, and maybe up to 110 for the other water agencies. And part two of that same question is, what kind of incentives or pressures on businesses to change bathroom fixtures?
Well, I'm pretty sure, well, I know that the building code has made some changes that require new homes to be built with high efficiency water appliances. And I know that I'm speaking again for another water district, but I know High Desert Water District requires that there's retrofits, or at least the town, when homes are sold. And then there are incentives that we do also offer for our constituents, such as fixtures and toilets and things, to get after those particular in-home uses. And of course, if we had turf, we would have an aggressive cash for grass program. We're trying to create something that is more adaptable to our environment, and that's a little difficult because the big water users are the lawns, the turfs, and big institutions, and also, well, those are the big ones.
Kirby?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that, 90 seems like a low number, but since you don't have any lawns here, it's actually not such a low number. Because in Los Angeles, the average use is about 160 gallons per day per person, and 75% of that is in your yard, okay? So 90 is actually not that low, so people here could do a lot better. But it varies, like in Sacramento, large parts of Sacramento don't even have water meters, historically. So you don't even know how much water they're using, all right? And there's places like Rancho Santa Fe, in North County in San Diego, where in Rancho Santa Fe, the average water usage is 460 gallons per day per person, all right? I like that one, all right? Montecito is the same way. So it's very uneven, all right? So, it's like all things in life, it's not fair because, and of course, historically, the way you regulate that is you just start charging people more for water, all right? But that's not fair because that's socioeconomic. So that means that poor people who already can't afford the water, right? And rich people pay as much as you charge them, all right? So it's not a simple problem.
We appreciate the challenge, Dr. Patzert. That's a way to get in our face. Mr. Brill?
Getting at, or answering or responding to the question of the businesses, there's two. One we just touched on. There's price pressures, but there's also an emerging pressure, is that social pressure on businesses to have true sustainable practices, and we're just starting to see a shift on many businesses that are migrating more towards completely sustainable practices, and we're starting to see that come into their marketing. So yeah, there's two additional pressures that I think we'll see more of in the future.
Thank you. They can show their customers.
Yes.
Yeah. This one's to Marina.
Remember, the basic thing about water, it's socioeconomic, is that the poor people get shafted and the rich people get as much as they want. So you have to figure out how to deal with that.
This one's to Marina West and Kirby Brill. Does recharge dissolve chemicals, and does this have any effect on water toxicity?
You probably have more background.
Should I give you my answer?
That depends.
It depends. It really does. What the chemical is. Some migrate right through. Some are taken out. So it's kind of really highly variable of the nature of the soils and the type of chemicals.
My response would be that for the Ames groundwater project, we did look at the mixing of the state water project with our existing supply, and they're both very similar, and in some respects, believe it or not, I know folks tend to not believe this, the state water is actually is cleaner chemically than some of our groundwaters.
And this question for the group, recent reports revealed water usage in California, Northern California counties are conserving, but Southern California counties, mainly coastal, are up in usage. Why is there a disconnect in Southern California?
I'll take that one. And again, that's somewhat, not in all cases, but somewhat a matter of perspective and context. What the subtext fails to mention is that a lot of Southern California has already made significant declines in per capita use, and Northern California kind of started out extremely high. So when you look at it on a month-by-month basis, and the metrics that we're now sending to the state on a month-by-month basis, we've only been doing that for about 3 or 4 months. So when you look at it, when you look at some of these things in a relatively narrow perspective, and you say, okay, who are the winners and losers over the last 4 months, it kind of looks like the answer is something. When you look at it in the context of 10, 15 years, you get a whole nother answer. Yeah, in the Mojave Water Agency entire service area, we've seen a reduction in per capita use by 37% over the last probably 10 years. Our numbers are in the single digits over the last 3 months. So that accounts for part of it. But yes, there definitely are some communities, some coastal, some not coastal, that are still relatively high in per capita use and have not seen the declines. But I think for the most part, Southern California, by necessity, has made long-term investments in water conservation, and there's been significant overall driving down per capita use.
Yeah, just remember, you know, a few percent here and there, whether it's north or south, doesn't really make any difference, because agriculture is getting 80% of the available water, all right, to grow almonds and walnuts and rice for export to China, all right, and so they're putting the pressure on the California homeowner, all right, but in fact, you know, this is the fact, is that you're not getting your fair share of water. And the other thing is that 300 million gallons of water per year on a golf course in the Coachella Valley, you know, and then they tell you you have to decrease your water usage by 5%. Come on. There's something wrong with that picture.
Another question to the group. With the new groundwater laws regarding pumping now in effect, how are agencies that have depleted supplies defined?
Actually, I think that question is going towards who will be impacted. It sounds like. I don't want to get too nerdy here, but there is a very specific test of who has to develop these plans, and it's not necessarily which basins have been in decline and which haven't, although that's an important piece. It's more characterized by a classification that the state has made of a high and medium priority basin. And there's a whole range of variables. Overdraft is a piece of that variable, but you can have, no, I'll just stop there. It's defined by the state's definition of high or medium priority basins, of who will be impacted in the short term. But I would offer, even though basins that currently may not be classified as medium or high, that paradigm is shifting. And I think in the next several decades, pretty much all of California will be caught in that snare, if you will, of requiring sustainable groundwater management.
And I would offer that Bighorn Desert View Water Agency and the surrounding agencies are kind of, I think you'd agree, ahead of the curve. There's either an adjudicated basin or there's management concepts in place that lead to sustainability as opposed to just pump it.
Thank you. The next question is a technology question. What's the outlook for desalinization? Any hope there?
Well, when the San Andreas cracks and we become beachfront property, I think it's another in the portfolio. It has its challenges, but we're starting to see it.
Challenges are not technical; they're political, and it's a lot of it has to do with I think again a changing paradigm and issues along the coast and use of facilities on the coast. But the technology is there. It's been there. International communities have been doing it. The cost of doing it is rapidly decreasing. So, yeah, I mean, there's financial challenges. Those are taking care of themselves because the technology is getting cheaper and the cost of water is increasing. But I'd say the challenges are probably more political than they are technical.
Dr. Patzert?
Well, there's all kinds of desalinization. For instance, all the water that comes from the Colorado, Colorado water is actually pretty salty by the time it gets this far south to Lake Havasu. And so they use filtration systems, all water districts, to desal your water, trying to take the salt out of it. And so actually desalinization on a large scale is already happening in California in practice. Now what we're talking about here is taking seawater, all right, and using an awful lot of energy and converting it to fresh water. All right, now that would increase the cost of your water by a factor of 4 or 5, okay? It's very expensive. For instance, in San Diego County, they're building a desal plant, Poseidon, They've been building it for 10 years, and there's still not one drop of water, and they've already spent $1 billion. Now, the problem with desal is that you desal at the coast, and where are all the customers? All the customers are uphill, all right? So you have to factor in the cost of the energy, pumping it up to Riverside, all right, or Joshua Tree from San Diego. And so the other thing is that these desal plants don't produce that much water. At the present growth of population in the state of California, you couldn't even build them fast enough to keep up with population growth, all right? So, but the good news is that there's a lot of water infrastructure in the state of California. There is no place in the world that moves more water over a larger area than the state of California. It's fantastic. It's the envy of every water manager in the world. The question is that who gets the water, all right? Because there is a lot of water here, and there's a lot of water infrastructure, all right? And let me just say that the voters of California have just rolled over and given it all to agriculture, all right? And I keep saying that, all right? But it's a fact. There's a lot of water in the state of California, and there's a lot of infrastructure to move it all over the state, including here. So that's my 2 cents.
That's a perfect segue into one of the next topics. I wonder if any of you know how much of our energy in the state of California we use to move water around. What kind of
20%.
20% of the total energy in the state?
Total energy in the state is 20% just to move water.
Just to move water. So that segues into a question about a local issue, but one that is also regional. Here in Joshua Tree, we've been bombarded with large-scale solar installations that want to come in and consume enormous amounts of water. What can we as citizens do to prevent that magnitude of water use in our community? That's to any of you.
You had to go there.
Is that a Marina question?
I think that, and I've said it before, there are things we do that have unintended consequences. So is it worth the water to produce that energy? And so that's one thing. Second, I think that if we have to be saddled with those plants, we need to do it in a way that doesn't scrape the land that we need to use that water. And maybe that prevents the dust that covers the panels that then needs water. And one of the things that we don't really know from the projects we've seen in the Morongo Basin is what that number really is. How much water is it going to take, because we don't have the experience. The other thing that bothers me about the projects is the reduced property tax valuations that affect the agencies that rely on property tax to operate. Some portion of their expenses or their revenues come from property taxes, and if we were to build the homes in those lots, we would get more revenue than we get off these farms. To run, and they still impact us because we have to supply that water, or we have to supply a way to get their road, or they're not contributing to other infrastructure in the basin.
It's a big question right now, isn't it? On to another water user in our local area. The question is just how much water is the Nestle Corporation taking out of the Coachella Valley water supply? Anybody have any idea? I know that's in NWD's backyard.
I don't think that's published. It's proprietary, but it's a lot.
What's this, for bottled water?
Arrowhead.
Yeah,
He's talking about the Arrowhead plant. They take their water off the reservation, and I don't think those numbers are really known. However, I understand that with the issues in the Coachella Valley that they've agreed to produce that if everyone else will produce numbers and work on conservation.
You make that information public, you mean?
And we have a nice display over at our table about the cost of bottled water compared to your drinkable Title 22 tap water.
Another issue that's very important to us here in the Morongo Basin and regionally in the desert is the transfer of water from the Cadiz Basin over to the Santa Margarita Water District. And what does the panel think about or have solutions for this kind of water transfer? Are there state laws that can be passed? What are the kind of solutions that we can look to keep Cadiz intact?
I like to stay.
Well, I guess it starts with making sure there's adequate monitoring. and I'm somewhat familiar. I'm not an expert on the project by any means, but apparently some of the county requirements have required monitoring. And yeah, in my mind, it would the kind of the first level would be to make sure it's done consistent with these new state laws of sustainability. Make sure there's adequate monitoring, make sure there's adequate reporting, and to require that they comply with state law, the new state laws.
So under the new state laws, if a basin becomes overdrafted, they have to create a management plan for that basin to decide how they're going to recharge it. So how would that play into some of the plans out there in Cadiz to do long-term pumping of an old aquifer?
Well, there's kind of as my understanding, there's kind of dueling engineers, dueling geologists saying, well, the plan will be overdrafting. No, the plan won't be overdrafting. If it does go, at a minimum, there should be adequate monitoring to make sure that can be scientifically calculated.
Great, thank you.
I'll just be feisty and add. And again, I haven't studied that project, but it's my understanding that long ago, when that was to be some sort of solid waste dump, there was no natural recharge. And now we flip it to a water supply project, and suddenly there's a lot of natural recharge. But as I explained in my talk, even though Bighorn Desert View is blessed with natural recharge, it's a very small quantity. It's nowhere near the 50 to 75,000 acre feet of surplus water they're claiming. So it will take monitoring, and if things are as we sort of suspect in desert basins, then it will happen really quick. Although they do have a phase 2 plan, which would be to use the area as a banking location as well.
Very good. This question is about state water and agriculture. So Dr. Patzert, I think it's right up your alley. The question is, and you can correct these numbers if you'd like, but 40% of state water feeds 20 million people. How much of this water is treated and stored in underground water basins?
Well, that's an excellent question. It turns out that the water during the good years that comes down the aqueduct gets pumped into the Los Angeles basin. Quite a bit of that actually goes during the good years to recharge local water basins, like in the San Gabriel Valley. So some is used directly by the MWD, who is the largest wholesaler in the state, retails it to small water districts. But quite a bit of that is sold and stored in water basins, groundwater basins all over Los Angeles basin. As well as some of it is actually stored in groundwater basins in the San Joaquin Valley, and then is used years later. And so the MWD has a pretty good plan where, you know, during the good years you save water, and during the bad years you draft water, which is how it should work. All right? And but of course they have more water than you do. All right? So in the long run, as long as this area, this region continues to grow and continues to develop, whatever the people here decide that development will look like, you will become increasingly more dependent on imported water. Right? There's no doubt about that. Probably close to the edge right now.
Mm-hmm.
Comments?
So you're never going to be self-sufficient here.
Agreed. Yeah, that's our future, and it's that pressure is reduced by having a robust portfolio of, you know, a lot of different sources: aggressive banking, reclamation, and conservation. All those things got to work together. But yeah, I mean, it's within our service area. When we look at all the different demands, we're seeing an increasing pressures on the State Water Project. Now we have contractual amounts available to us to provide that room, but on the other side, we're getting pressures from the delta that I referred to that are pushing that down.
But you know, you're worried about growth and your water supply here, but in southwestern San Joaquin Valley, which is as dry as you are, all right? I think they have less than 5 inches of rainfall a year, all right? They super irrigate the whole thing and grow almonds and walnuts and who knows what, right? Because they've been there for a long time and they got the water rights, right? And so they're definitely not having town hall meetings in the San Joaquin Valley about what their water is because they think they own it. Right? So can you imagine growing almonds in Joshua Tree? That's what they're doing in the San Joaquin Valley.
It's a good question to kind of focus back in locally a little bit here. Do water agency or water agency partnerships have the right to refuse to supply water to high users during drought periods or when in recharge, particularly users like golf courses or solar farms?
I'll take a stab at that. Our service agreements, well, I mean, there are certain contracts we have with all the IDM participants, but those contracts allow the agency to alter deliveries depending on the water that we have available to us. And that's why banking programs are so important, because when it's available to us, we highly encourage our customers to take as much as they can. And if they can't, to work on putting the necessary infrastructure in so that they can. And that's been a focus of ours in the last 10 years. That's why Joshua Basin, that's why, but I mean, we helped facilitate that project, and we also helped facilitate the Bighorn project so that they can be in a position of when we have it available, taking it. But our agreements do allow us to reduce that when it's reduced to us. That's how the system works. That's how the system is going to work in the future, again, even more severely, because, again, the higher highs and the lower lows.
So just following right up on that, can you explain to the audience what an allocation means? We've used that word.
An allocation is there's a certain kind of base right, if you will. Think of it as a shareholder to a company. You own a 20% share in the company. When profits are really good, well, you get your share of the profits. So by analogy, think of snowpack as kind of the profits of the company, so to speak. And every year, the state looks at their reservoir levels, and they do this multiple times during the year. And they look at the snowpack levels. They do snow surveys. Matter of fact, almost every month during the height of the snow season, they go out and take their snow surveys, and they make a calculation of how much is available in the reservoirs and the snow, and they adjust everybody's allocation. They adjust everybody's share of the profits, so to speak, up or down, depending on how good a year is. So when I showed you that slide of first ever 0% allocation last year in 2014, they basically said there are no profits. We're not going to have any water to give to anybody. And again, that was unprecedented. We kind of, as contractors, we kind of knew that was coming, but it never really came. And there was a lot of contractors that kind of didn't believe it would come. It came, and that's part of the lessons that were learned out of 2014. Is that is a fact of life that will come, and we need to be prepared with all of our portfolio of actions to be prepared for more 0% allocations.
What do you mean there's no water?
There's no water.
The other question that follows up on that is stormwater capture and reuse, a potential source of water. And I'm gonna add into that another question, because we're close to out of time here. Can you talk about methods like rain tanks and water harvesting earthworks?
Want me to take stormwater?
Well, I was going to say that in the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan that Mojave created in the last year and a half, 2-year period, Bighorn Desert View did look at the potential for capturing stormwaters. The challenge is that it comes fast and furious, and if you were really to count, it looks like a lot of water, but it's really not volumetrically a lot of water, so to speak, and the cost of that infrastructure would be huge, although it's an opportunity. It's definitely an opportunity, and it is something that where we design flood control, get it out of the neighborhood and get it out into the ocean, we're now saying, whoa, we've got to turn that around. And you see projects in the Inland Empire that are doing that, and it's a new opportunity.
And a comment about things like rain harvesting or earthworks, Dr. Patzert?
Well, you know, rain comes, a rain year in California, Southern California, usually means 5 big storms, if you're lucky, of about 4 days duration. So it comes at you like a fire hose. So it's like standing there with a champagne glass and there's some guy with a fire hose shooting at you and you're trying to catch it, all right? And so what happens is that historically it's caused a lot of flooding, for instance, in Los Angeles, Orange County, Riverside County. And so in 1938, after a big series of storms, what they decided to do, because there's only one thing more valuable than water in California. What's that? Right, real estate. And so everything south of downtown LA is a floodplain. Same thing in Orange County. Irvine's a floodplain. So what they did was they concreted the Los Angeles River from the San Fernando Valley all the way to the aquarium of the Pacific, all right? And so it's 51 miles of concrete connected to 1,600 miles of storm sewers, all right? So forget it, you know, it's a flood control system. It's not a water catchment system. And, you know, the horse definitely left the barn at this point because everything south of downtown LA or most of Orange County is built up on all those floodplains. So that's that, you know. So billions and billions of dollars worth of concrete, if you're going to redesign that and redo it, it will take a century. So that's, you know, that's unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
A couple last questions. It's been mentioned that we don't have turf here, and yet we're sharing our water supply with places that still use huge amounts of water on landscaping, and there's no push, or there doesn't seem to be a trend to end this inequality. Can you comment on that and about existing plans and trends?
We need a revolution. Come on. And I'm willing to be the water czar. No, it's just not fair. You know, this is America. You know, everybody should have a shot at the water. You people should get your water, all right? And those people in Palm Springs should not get as much water as they're getting. Or Rancho Santa Fe or Montecito, or the guys that are growing almonds in a place that get 5 inches of rain a year. It's just not fair. Come on, all right? So you better be careful who you vote for, all right? This is America. Whoever you vote for, all right, will ensure, you know, whether you get water or not in the next 50 years. If you leave it the way it is, all right?
Those paradigms are shifting, though.
Yeah.
That shift is underway.
But there is a lot of water, remember, in the state of California. There is a lot of water. And there's a lot of water infrastructure, all right? And there are really good water managers here, all right? The problem is with the water laws.
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. One of the water laws, like I said, the paradigm is shifting. The seemingly abundance of water coming from the groundwater, that is not going to be there in the future. That's right. I mean, it's not. Those are going to be some radical changes that are going to come over the next couple of decades. That's why I say there's a lot of things in place. You know, kind of moving water. I mean, groundwater. That's one thing. Kind of moving water that's, you know, previously established like in the state water contractor in the water contract. It's really difficult, and for us as a fellow state water contractor. I mean, for someone to say kind of that we're not using our share wisely and someone else should take it, I mean, we pay millions of dollars a year for the contractual access to that, and so there's kind of some embedded issues there that I mean, kind of overdrafting groundwater. That's, you know, one can make a strong argument that's a public resource, but it kind of moving around contractual allotments. Without the written expressed consent of the contractual owner, that gets real difficult. So opportunities, but definitely some challenges there.
So big rewrites, you're saying?
Yeah,
Big rewrites.
extreme rewrites, yeah.
We'll end with one last question, and this is almost a PSA. It's about community water use and wells, and what happens if you see water leaks on other people's property. Kind of the people that use a ton of water in our communities, whether we can see it from a broken pipe or whether they're just a huge water well user. How, are we to know if somebody's using a well, is that use monitored if it's an unincorporated Joshua Tree? And then two, what are we to do about bad players out there that have broken pipes or have major leaks and are wasting water? We're going after the water wasters with this question. How do we track them down?
Well, we had one out in Landers. A gentleman had a well, and his tank had a big hole in it, and every morning as I drove to work, there's a giant lake in the front yard. And so we used the pressure of the county code enforcement to that and his neighbors, so it was public pressure that got him to fix that problem. And it wasn't until the neighbors and more neighbors and some folks from the county came around and said, hey.
What about the use that's a little more hidden, like if somebody's using a well, a substantial amount of water out of a well, is that monitored and is that public record?
A lot, well, in Bighorn Desert View Water Agency, there's no metering of the private wells, although in our district there are not that many wells in the central part of our district. In Johnson Valley, that is one of the only water sources besides hauled water. And so there are private wells out there, and at some point in time that may become an issue, and it'll be again driven by some sort of action, some sort of negative action that happens.
Very
well,
good.
The other way you could do it is in Sierra Madre, where you can rat them out on Twitter.
That works too.
That works, rat them out.
And I will say that I had heard early in the summer that even though Montecito is very wealthy, money doesn't help you if your well's dry, and they do have dry wells.
That's great. Well, thank you all. Thank you, three. Can we get a round of applause for our speakers? Thanks again to the National Park Association and the Desert Institute for putting the Black Rock Lecture Series on, and for Copper Mountain College for hosting us and co-sponsoring this lecture series. We're going to be back here again next month in February to talk about renewable energy development codes in the county of San Bernardino. On what date, Kevin, is that next lecture in the lecture series?
February 20th.
February 20th. We're going to be back here to talk about renewable energy development codes in San Bernardino. Thank you all for coming.